when I was still living in an at-risk metro housing area, and I'm walking with a friend. We're walking home, school bags on and everything. We're actually coming back from the community center, playing basketball. It's summertime, I have shorts on and I have a white t-shirt. My friend's probably wearing track pants and a sweater. Both have our bags on, basketball bouncing in hand. And the police are driving down the street, and then they see us, and so they start to slow down. Driving behind us, but now they're driving slow, right? Already in our heads, here we go again. Here we go again, getting harassed again. All we're doing is walking from the gym with a basketball, going home, probably gonna play some video games, watch a movie or whatever. But now here we are, getting harassed again. The cops are behind us, driving slow. So now they pull up to the side of us, hop out the car. Where you guys going? Where you guys from? I live here, this is my name, this is where I'm going. Oh, apparently something happened 10 minutes drive away. And we fit the profile. So now where are we from, where are we going, who are we? And it should be disturbing. In the eyes of somebody watching on the outside, it's disturbing. You know, look how the police treat these guys. Look what they go through, and I can't believe they're living like this. But in our eyes, it's like, it's normal.
The first time it happens, you may be scared. The second time it happens, you know the drill, you can handle it. The third time it happens, like, oh, here we go again. By the time you get to the fifth, sixth, seventh time, you're agitated. I'm still a very calm, patient person. Could you imagine other people who aren't as patient? And this is where you get issues with people getting hurt or people getting arrested for no reason.
Between 2008 and 2012, 1.8 million contact cards on over 1 million individuals. That's a lot of interactions that have been documented. They end up in a giant database. The vast majority of those interactions, there's nothing criminal happening, nothing at all. Yet all of your personal details end up into this database. Who you're with when they stopped you, their suspicions, like what was the reason for the stop? Suspected gang activity. Well, maybe you're in an area where there's gang activity and they suspect you might be a gang member. Now, internally in that database, you're connected to a gang. And so it's pretty nefarious when you start thinking about what that database is.
You look up on my contact cards, the police officers will say, oh, not police friendly. So now when you have an officer who wants to stop me for the next time, he's going to pull this up. And then it's a total different interaction. It's not just police officer to citizen. It's more like possible threat.
Some young men told me one night they're on their way to the convenience store and near their house 2 blocks away, they got stopped and interrogated for 10, 15 minutes. On the way back, they got stopped and interrogated for 15 minutes by 2 other police officers. Yeah. It's just like living in an occupied territory. Well, there's high crime areas, you might want to have more police officers there in order to have a presence that would prevent crime, maybe. Yeah. But why do they stop innocent people? They could just stand there.
The problem facing the city of Toronto right now is what we would call a crisis of distrust, or a question of the legitimacy of policing in a lot of neighborhoods in the city.
It started back in 1957 as a suspect card, where we take information on somebody who is a suspect and retain that information. It evolved since 1957 to present day, or we'll go back to prior to July 1st this past year, where we were in the practice of documenting every person that we spoke with, taking their information, entering into a database.
The argument from the police perspective is that if there is ever a crime that needs to be solved, you might have in a internal database who this individual's associates were, so who the victim's associates were. People who are identified as Black or African Canadian consistently are 3 or 4 times more likely to be stopped, questioned, and searched by the police.
To be clear, racial profiling by the Toronto Police Service and every other police service, racial profiling where an officer uses race as the primary or only reason to stop somebody and to carry out any other policing activity of an enforcement nature, it's wrong. It's illegal. It's immoral. Does it happen? Yeah. In an organization with 5,500 officers, policing that I've been involved with for 25 years, does it happen? Absolutely. Unfortunately, right now, carding has come to mean anytime a cop stops and talks to me, I'm being racially profiled, I'm going to be carded, and I'm being treated illegally. That's not the case. People break the law all the time. They speed, they park illegally, they jaywalk, they commit minor acts of criminality, they're involved in unlawful public gatherings, and in any of those instances, a police officer may intervene. That's not carding, that's not racial profiling. That's police work. That's the work of public safety in a context like Toronto.
In my view, where there is a power imbalance, which there is, and where there is a lack of information on the part of the person being stopped that they are free to go, I think we need to view that as a detention. And I would argue, and it's CCLA's position, that we need to view that as a detention. If the person feels psychologically constrained, and that is the court's definition for detention, and feels like they are not free to go, that is a detention. And certain rights should follow.
A former police officer who had just left the service, I was interviewing him for some other purpose, and I just casually asked, what do you know about carding? And then he proceeded to give me this, I believe, a frank, honest account of, from an officer's perspective, what carding is. So he described how it played a role in promotions, and if you don't have enough contact cards, your supervisor may say, hey, Platoon A got 15 per officer, how come you only got 10? So then what the officers would do, he said, and himself included, was you'd go into a park and look for people who aren't well dressed, and you just go in and harass them, with the hope that once you ran their name through their database, you would find that they had a previous contact, and that would be the justification for the stop.
I was going to pick up my 15-month daughter at that time, and I was picking her up from my girlfriend's mom's house, and she lives in like a priority neighborhood. So I go there, and it was the same kind of thing. It was me and my girlfriend in the car. There was cops already there that were driving out while I was driving in. And instead of them just continuing on their way, they had to stop, reverse, pull up behind me, come out, ask me to roll my window down, show my license, my insurance, all that stuff. And right away, I'm like, why? Like, what did I do? And they're like, well, we don't know if you're trespassing, we don't know that. And by the time that gets out, there's already 2 other cruisers coming, blocking off the front and the side of my car. So I'm literally blocked in. And all this for what? Just to find out who I am and to find out my business there?
This is the life, this is how life is. It's how it's supposed to be. Why? I don't know. It's just the way life is. This is the mindset of a person growing up having to do with police harassment, police brutality, and just used to be having their rights abused.
Now, anytime we see a police officer or something, the first thing that comes to mind is this guy's about to approach me on like some BS. Like obviously, like you're probably there for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. So approach me with a reason. They should come with respect, just like if I was to go to them and ask them something or whatever, I'll treat them with respect. A simple hi, how are you? That's an easy approach right there, and it doesn't happen. It's always don't move, da 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 da. Like who said I was gonna move?
The communicating of where we started and where we ended up with carding is an important for both sides to understand. We need to understand the anxiety of the community of being in a database where our lens of putting people in the database aren't strictly to identify them as suspects or persons of interest. It was more or less to document the people that we had interaction with.
I think the important question is who's watching the police and how much information are they providing so that there can be proper accountability. And unfortunately, the only people who have been watching and monitoring and providing reports on data that is in police databases is the Toronto Star, and it hasn't been an easy process for them.
In the late 90s, we got interested in seeing what kinds of data the police actually kept on on arrest charges, interactions with the public. And we tried informally to get data, just asking, can you give us your database? They said no. For 7 years, the police at every turn fought that request. We had to go to court for it, and eventually we won access to the carding data. We analyzed it, and it started showing the patterns that we suspected it would show, that blacks were being stopped disproportionately. And the discussion around this changed from one of denial to one of acknowledgement.
As a person who's lived in the city of Toronto for almost 40 years and grown up in Scarborough as a young person of color, I was very much aware of this issue. I got 3 brothers. We all have our story to tell about Canada Border Agency, local Toronto police, policing in other parts of the world. So to be clear, there's nothing in the Toronto Star that surprised me, statistically, anecdotally, or anything else. It just helped to put it into the mainstream conscious, and good for them.
So the Policing Literacy Initiative is a group of young leaders from all different neighborhoods across the city who came together to look at policing issues. And so the idea was that we met twice a month for 4 months to study policing issues, hear from different experts from Toronto Police Services, the African Canadian Legal Clinic, different community groups, academics and journalists, to help us understand what was going on.
When you think of policing, you think of guns, shooting, you think of raids, you think of racial profiling, you think of being stopped for no apparent reason.
Typically when you're dealing with policing issues, you're dealing with people in social work, people that are criminal justice, people that are legal, or the police themselves. In this situation, you're dealing with people that just had a passion for helping people.
I got involved with the Policing Literacy Initiative in the summer after attending a Trayvon Community Forum, and I was extremely impressed by the vision they had and mobilizing a lot of the young members in the community to kind of tackle issues that we're currently facing in Toronto.
In 2012, out of some 250,000 police community interactions, there were only 764 complaints made. Of those complaints, 395 were investigated and 369 were screamed out for whatever reasons. I looked at those numbers and I started asking, why is that so low? My gut feeling is that that 700 and whatever number of complaints are not due to the excellence of the performance of the Toronto Police Service, but instead because there are barriers. So I started talking to people about what barriers they encountered, whether it was just the first step of, I don't even know who I go and make a complaint to. A lot of people remain unaware of the existence of the OIPRD. If people go, and I've heard this one a lot, when people go into police stations to make complaints, they have very bad experiences with the front desk personnel. They've already had a bad experience with police, and then they're faced with an incredible level of rudeness and unhelpfulness, or just not knowing what the process is.
The way it's supposed to operate is simply you go to a police station, and then you can tell them, I have a formal complaint to make. Ideally, most of them would be trained, or most of them would know what the process is. In many cases, this is not actually the case.
I'd been studying carding for 2 months, and on a late October night, I was outside of my apartment building on a phone with a colleague. At that point, I was approached by 2 Toronto police officers in their vehicle who had wanted to perform a street check to see what I'd been doing outside of my apartment. And I was in some ways living out the very things that we were looking at in a theoretical way. I requested a mediated conversation.
The informal resolution process is just a way for citizens to have essentially informal mediations with police officers that they have problems with. It's got a lot of potential to deal with a lot of the complaints that citizens have. They'll be able to just learn the viewpoint of the police officer. And it also helps because each individual police officer that undergoes the process, they themselves learn more about the way people react to certain things that they do.
The mediated conversation occurred about 2 months later, and it was between myself and the two officers who stopped me on the street. And we had a great conversation. I was very, very pleased by the fact that they were well prepared to discuss the practices, the procedures, and I think that if it was used more often would make for better police-community relations, because it would force us to humanize each other a little bit more.
As I started to read about disproportionate contact in Toronto, I came across some surprising facts, like a Toronto Star article talking about how even with New York stop and frisk laws, you were more likely as a black teenager to be stopped in Toronto and carded in Toronto, and also that a Sun News report talking about how blacks make up 2.5% of the population, but 9% of the population in federal prisons. And I also looked into the shooting of Sammy Atim, and I knew that there was public outrage, but I knew that there might be a solution that came out of that incident, because we all heard about Sammy Atim because of a video, because someone in the public used their camera to shoot a video, and I wanted to explore the use of videos.
So body-worn cameras refers to a policy that would see every Toronto police officer wear a camera on his or her collar and record their interactions with community members.
And in my research, I came across the 2012 study. The findings were pretty staggering. There's a decrease in 60% in cases where there's a use of force, and complaints towards police shot down 88%. When I saw that, I was like, how come Toronto police aren't using body-worn cameras?
The ideal in question that we're pondering is, does community housing give too much power to the police services? So in the op-ed, we explored the ideal of being able to build something where residents engage together and they create almost like a community watch. People who are not involved in planning and not involved in the process that's bringing safety to them typically don't feel safe to begin with.
The general structure of a resident-led safety unit would be a mixture of uniformed and non-uniformed police. The uniformed police wouldn't consistently be in the community, but rather the non-uniformed community members would patrol the community. Instead of using suppression tactics, these community members would be able to go about and engage different residents in the community, converse with them, ask them how their day is going. And I think this will build community, it will build trust. We
were kind of focusing very strongly on the incident that happened in Neptune.
4 teens, known as the Neptune 4, up in Lawrence Heights neighborhood. They, one evening when we're walking from their building in a TCHC complex to a program, a mentoring program, and a Tavis van rolls up unmarked. Out come 2 officers. They start questioning these boys. Who are you? Where are you going? Show me some ID. So this one teen tried to exercise his rights and said, actually, I'm not answering your questions, I'm going to walk. And it resulted in a violent takedown and a gun being drawn and pointed at these teens. So, you know, you start hearing about this kind of thing happening, and this is, you know, you're walking in your own house, essentially. You know, this is their yard. They haven't left the TCHC compound, and you're being asked, you know, about your business being there. And that kind of thing has really, I think, affected the public trust in the police.
Identify key residents in the community who can take a leadership role and begin to roll out this ideal to key stakeholders outside of the communities. You're talking about agencies, you're talking about Toronto Public Health, Toronto Police Services, Toronto Community Housing. Say if there's a situation that goes into crisis, this residents group now will have built a safety response model where now you know when to call the police know who to connect when they get to the community. So all of a sudden, things become far more interactive. But you also then have police coming in communities and doing policing. not coming into communities and doing the harassment pieces and the surveillance pieces. They're coming in with a defined purpose, and that actually takes strain off of the police a little bit, because if they're coming in doing all the other pieces, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing against them because they're doing a lot of wrong in that regards, right?
I've been assigned to PACER from the very infancy of March of 2012. It became clear that the scope of the review needed to expand, and we needed to tackle a broader issue of bias and issues surrounding the sense of racial profiling.
And so we have everything from individual officer training, evaluation, and supervision, to systemic changes, looking at all of our policy and procedures, looking at how effectively or not so effectively we've educated our members and the broader community about what we do. It looks at leveraging technology, like looking at body-worn cameras. It looks at information retention, privacy issues. We've taken a comprehensive review through 31 recommendations to make sure that we improve the effectiveness of individual officers, and more importantly, because the majority of the recommendations aren't geared around individual officers, they're geared around systemic changes. Better procedure, better policy, better record keeping, better retention, better supervision, better audits and controls. The second thing that I want to talk about is that the recommendations actually create more community oversight and community involvement in designing, evaluating, and changing the system.
We want to make sure that people understand, one, that they're free to leave, and two, let's let them know why we're there and why we're saying hello.
One of the PACER recommendations is rewriting the procedure on who we card, why we card, and how we card. And so an officer is now going to have to articulate the reason why he needs to retain the information. Another portion of that new procedure is going to be accountability. The supervisor is going to have to look at that and agree with the fact that us retaining this information is going to lead to community safety.
We'll ask you, for instance, what do you think of the police? And they'll say, oh, I can't stand the police. I think they're corrupt. I think they treat people in my community unfairly. What do you think about the officer who's working in your school, for instance? Oh, that's a fantastic guy. He plays basketball with us. I can go to him with to discuss problems. Well, if you like this person, why don't you like the police? And a common response I'll get is, well, that's the public relations police. That's not the real police. The real police are the guys who roll around my community after 10 o'clock at night and stop and question and search me and treat me unfairly. So the youth have often very sophisticated views of the police and are able to distinguish between what they refer to as the social workers or public relations police and those that are involved heavily in police enforcement activities.
You have an organization that wants to keep a positive face, but you got people behind the scenes that are causing havoc. And that havoc speaks louder than your mission statement. It's like, okay, in front of the camera, let's pretend it's our rainbow and sunshines, but once the cameras leave, let's get back to the bullshit.
I just hope you guys accomplish what you're actually trying to do. And I respect the fact that you guys are doing this, because not a lot of people out there are doing it. Us as people and them as people, we wanted to sit down somehow and plan and just make plans. Without the people, there's not going to be no change. The change has to start within us.
I think at the very basic human level, we have to, on a personal level, find ways to understand what people's experiences may have been in their lives. Whether it's with the police directly here, whether it's their experiences from where they came, and find ways to keep communication and dialogue going to build higher levels of trust.
If you have people that are growing up being harassed, they're growing up with this mental stigma that, okay, I'm looked at this way by society. In the eyes of the police, this is how I'm looked at. How is that person supposed to ever trust or work with the police at all?
I can tell you that the most effective policing is a uniformed officer who is known and respected in the community. And after a crime happens, it's the person you go to say, who do you think could have been involved with it? Because they have the most rich and current information on what's going on. And when they're looking to solve a problem, not by way of enforcement, but by way of some sort of a community mobilization or crime prevention effort, can go to the right people in that neighborhood because they know that the people of influence, the people who have access to resources, public spaces, funding, and they can go and contact those assets in the community and bring them into a problem-solving situation.
They owe it to the public to inform us about what they're doing, who they're stopping, and to date, we are not provided with the forms that they used to use, the questions that they're currently using, information about the databases that it's going to. And that's information that is still missing from this discourse. And it's very important that, that any data that is recorded by police, not that they should be recording data for this purpose, but any data that they are recording needs to be monitored and reviewed by a civilian oversight body, because that's how we're going to know what is actually going on.
How will you do something different that your predecessor hasn't already tried? And if you're doing something that we know that has been tried, that has been tested, then are you really living up to your responsibility so that the next generation experiences policing and equality under the law in a different way? That's what we're all here for, I think, is to get to that ultimate goal. And whether you're a police officer or you're a youth worker, you're a member of the community, you're a deputy police chief, a Toronto Star reporter, regardless of your role in this conversation, I think we all want to believe we have the same goal in mind. So remembering that we are all ideally on the same team and we're all ideally working towards the same goals, and to hold each other accountable to actually pushing the needle and moving it forward so that we can say we've made a real contribution to this city, to these issues, to our country. That's our goal.
When I look at a group like PLI and I look at the people that came there, I look at people that say, no, it can change. You begin to identify champions on the police force who see policing from a different perspective and different angle, from just the surveillance aspect of it, from just the suppression aspect of it. That's how you begin to change it, by having champions within there who believe and connect with the community members and people of the community and people of greater communities to say, this is not right. We need to change them. And when they begin to say, yes, we need to change them as well, you begin to change it.
Yeah, it's like your will trying to overtake it. So I gotta feel the till with some motivation. Get a proper shield to seal what we growing lately. There's a lot of ills to kill when you open daily. Get some pride of hills and wheels and we rolling, baby. It's that Copperfield concealed that we going crazy. And the Copperfield we steal and we broken lazy. So we shot until the steel unloaded blazing. It's like you're prone to defeat when you got a past record and you're known to police. Even if it's jaywalking, not chrome in the Veeks, they still got an excuse to hold it and squeeze. Oh shit, another child gone. In the city won't live that long.